In the previous sessions, we have discussed about the digestive system as well as the respiratory system. Now let's discuss the circulatory system. Now, first let's discuss a historical fact. Okay, so William Harvey, okay, he was the first biologist, or he's also known as the father of technical circuits. So he was the first to discover the circulation of blood. Okay. So William Harvey first discovered the blood circulation, and he was the first to study the blood vessels in snakes and conceptualize the heart as a pump. Okay. So our circulatory system essentially it consists of the blood vessels, which are like the pipes or the tubes, and we have a pumping organ called the heart. So all this idea was first conceptualized by the William Harvey. Then why do we need circulation in the first place? Okay, why the transportation of various materials or substances is important? So transportation, okay, we need to transport oxygen, nutrients, and hormones, okay, to different cells of the body. Okay, in order to transport the different hormones like the insulin, like the glucagon, the growth hormone, okay, the different types of steroid hormones, the peptide hormones, as well as the gases, or like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and as well as the essential nutrients like the carbohydrates or the glucose, amino acids, fatty acids that we derive from digestion. So for effective transport of these different substances from one part of the body to the other part of the body, or from one tissue or one cell to the other tissue or other cell, is the main idea behind the transportation. Now in the simple organisms, the transportation can be done by simple diffusion. Okay, so in unicellular organisms, for example, by simple diffusion, that is with the difference of the gradient from higher concentration to lower concentration, the substance moves and the transportation can be achieved. In the complex organisms like the human beings, we need a complex circulatory system that is facilitated by a pump that is called the heart and the network of blood vessels in the body. Now, the apart from the transport of essential nutrients or the essential things, okay, the blood or the entire transport system is also required to remove the metabolic toxins and carbon dioxide away from the tissues. So, putting good stuff in the tissues, okay, as well as removing or transporting the bad stuff away from the tissues is the main function of the circulation system. And the circulatory system, particularly in humans and other advanced mammals, it is also it also provides protection, or it is essential for immunity, because in blood we have the immune cells. Okay, we have the immune cells, and with this circulatory system also, the immune cells are actually reached to the infected area. Okay, or these are delivered to the infected area. So simple organisms rely on the environmental water to carry out the process of transportation. The complex organisms, the complex multicellular organisms, they require a dedicated internal fluid system. Now, what is this internal fluid system? That is the human circulatory system or circulatory system in some other organism. Now, and this fluid, okay, so the word fluid is there, and this fluid is nothing but the blood. Now we have two types of circulatory system. First we have is the open circulatory system, and then we have the closed circulatory system. The open circulatory system, which is mainly found in the arthropods like the prawns and insects, as well as the mollusks. Okay, so in insects we have the in insects we predominantly have the open circulatory system. Now in the open circulatory system, the blood is pumped into sinuses, that is direct contact with tissues. Okay, so there, the blood makes a direct contact with the tissues. No vessels are involved. Okay, so the blood does not flow through enclosed, or the blood does not flow through the closed blood vessels. In the closed circulatory system, which is mainly found in annelids, for example, earthworms, the chordates, as well as the vertebrates, including all the mammals, birds, reptiles, etc. And here the mechanism is that blood is confined to vessels. Okay, blood always flow in the vessels. Okay, the broad vessels as well as the tiny, minutest vessels, which are also called the capillaries. And the exchange of substances between the blood and the tissue is carried out via the capillary walls. Okay, so capillary are the minutest, okay, or smallest thinnest blood vessels are known as capillaries. So through the walls of capillaries, the exchange of substances takes place. Now, looking at the characteristics or the further point of difference between the open circulatory system and closed circulatory system. So the open circulatory system, it has low pressure. The flow of blood is slow, and it is non-regulated. The volume is non-regulated. On the other hand, in the closed circulatory system, we have the high pressure. Because of this high pressure, we have rapid flow of blood into the vessels, as well as we have efficient volume regulation via the smooth muscles. Okay, smooth muscles that are there in the blood vessels, as well as the smooth vessels, which are also there in the uh, cardiac or the in the inside the heart. Now, based on the structure of heart, okay, so we have three different types of hearts. That is the two-chambered heart, the three-chambered hearts, and four-chambered heart. Okay, depending on the number of chambers that are there in the heart. So lower invertebrates, for example, in fishes. Okay, so in fishes we have a two-chambered heart. That is, the upper chamber is known as atrium, the lower chamber is known as ventricle. Okay, so through this heart, okay, so this is a proper heart. Okay, and the blood vessels are also there. So this is all the three types are a part of closed circulatory system. Okay, so do not get confused here. All the three are part of closed circulatory system. In fishes, we have two-chambered heart, that is one atrium, one ventricle. In amphibians and most reptiles. Okay. And when I say most reptiles, there is one exception. Okay. So they have a three-chambered heart, that is two atria, two atrium, and one ventricle. In birds, mammals, and crocodiles. Okay, so that one exception is crocodiles. So crocodile is a reptile. But despite that, it has a four-chambered heart. That is, it has two atrium and two ventricles. Okay, right atrium, left atrium, and right ventricle and left ventricle. Okay. So here in the two-chambered heart, the heart pumps the deoxygenated blood to the gills. Okay, so the deoxygenated blood is that blood which has a low concentration of oxygen and more concentration of the carbon dioxide. So that blood, the deoxygenated blood, is pumped towards the gills in the by the two-chambered heart. In the three-chambered heart, when we take the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, they mix in the single ventricle. Okay, so it is more advanced as compared to the two-chambered heart, but the effective separation of the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood. Now oxygenated blood is the oxygen rich blood. Okay, oxygen rich blood in which carbon dioxide have been removed, that is the oxygenated blood. So in the three-chambered heart of the amphibians and most reptiles, this because of the single ventricle, there is mixture of the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood. And in this pictogram or in this diagram, the oxygenated blood is represented in red and the deoxygenated blood is represented in blue. Now, when it comes to the four-chambered heart, okay, so because of the four chambers, because of a proper septum that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle, we have a complete separation. Because of it, we have a complete separation, and because of this, okay, we have the maximum efficiency for metabolic rates. Okay, so the four-chambered heart is the most advanced form of heart. Okay, in which we have four-chambered. All the four chambers have been properly separated by septums. Okay, and there is no intermixing. Okay, there is no intermixing. There is complete separation of the oxygenated blood with the deoxygenated blood. Now, let's talk about the pump, that is the heart. Okay, so heart is located in the thoracic cavity, that is in the chest cavity. Okay, and it is located between the two lungs. Okay, so it is located between the two lungs and is tilted towards the left, is slightly tilted towards the left, and it is of the size of a clenched fist. Okay, so your clenched fist, this approximately this is the size of a adult human heart. Now, the human heart is four chambered because we are mammals. We have a four chambered heart. So two of them are atria, which are receiving chambers. That means we receive the deoxygenated blood, or the blood is received in the atrium. Then the atrium contracts and the blood enters the ventricles. Okay, then the blood enters the ventricles. So we have two ventricles, which are the pumping chambers. Okay, so the ventricles, they have thick muscular balls to handle the high pressure exit flow. Okay, so all the pumping or the heavy lifting is done by the ventricles. So we have the right atrium, okay, in which the deoxygenated blood first comes. Okay, then the deoxygenated blood enters the right ventricle. Okay, through the right ventricle, it is pumped towards the lungs. Okay, and then the deoxygenated blood in the lungs gets converted into the oxygenated blood. The oxygenated blood then comes into the left auricle or the left atrium, and then it enters the left ventricle, and from that left ventricle it is pumped to different parts of the body. Okay, so we have two systems here, or we can say we have double circulation. One circulation is the systemic circulation, that is towards the entire body. The second circulation is the pulmonary circulation, that is pumping the blood towards as well as from the lungs. So this is how a human heart looks like. So we have the vena cava. Okay, now vena cava is the main vein. Okay, and vein is that blood vessel which carries the blood from different parts of the body towards the heart. Okay, so that blood vessel which carries blood from different body parts towards the heart is known as vein. So from the vena cava from the lower body and the vena cava from the upper body, that is rich in deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood gets filled in the right atrium. Okay, then right atrium contracts and the deoxygenated blood enters the right ventricle. Okay, so it enters the right ventricle. And when the right ventricle contracts, the blood rushes to the pulmonary arteries. Okay, the blood rushes to the pulmonary arteries. Now, arteries are those blood vessels which carry the blood from heart to different parts of the body. Okay, so the basic difference between veins and arteries is that veins carry blood from different parts of body towards the heart. The arteries, they carry the blood from heart to different parts of the body. Okay, so that deoxygenated blood now enters the pulmonary arteries. Okay, and if the word pulmonary is there, that means it is associated with lungs. Okay, so through the pulmonary arteries, the blood reaches to lungs. In lungs, there is effective exchange of gases. That is, the carbon dioxide is removed from the blood and blood is enriched with oxygen. So that is known as the oxygenated blood. So that oxygenated blood via the pulmonary veins, okay, via the pulmonary veins, it then reaches the left atrium. Okay, when the left atrium contracts, okay, the blood enters the left ventricle, and when the left ventricle contracts, okay, the blood rushes to different parts of the body through the main artery, which is known as aorta. Okay, so aorta is the main artery, and the vena cava is the main vein. Now let's discuss about the two types of blood vessels. So we have the arteries and the veins. Now, the function of the artery is distributor, that is, distributing the blood away from the heart. Okay, so they carry the blood away from the heart. The function of veins is the collector. Okay, so veins is the collector, it carries the blood towards the heart. Now, the pressure in the arteries is high because of the pumping action of the heart, and the pressure in the veins is low. And in veins, we have uh, valves, okay, which is absent in arteries. Okay, so the veins in the so the valves in the veins, Okay, so these are the valves in the veins. They are important in order to stop the backflow, okay, to the backflow of the heart, because in arteries the blood is pumped by the force of the heart, but in the veins the movement is passive. Okay, the movement of of the blood is passive. Okay, it is not controlled by the pumping action of the heart. Okay, so in order to prevent the backflow, okay, of the blood from the from the veins, okay, we have the valves in it. Okay, so this is another point of difference between the blood vessels, that is arteries have no valves and veins have the valves. Then we have the minutest blood vessels called the capillaries. Now, their function is the exchange of substances between the tissues and the or the between the different tissues and the blood. Okay, so these are one cell thick, okay, very minute, very thin, okay, and they are a connection between arteries and veins. Okay, so effectively what happens is arteries, okay, they bifurcate into branches and they become very minute, very thin. Okay, and because of that, the blood reaches to different tissues. Then in that tissues, the different types of capillaries they converge to form the veins. Okay, so we can say the capillaries are the connection, okay, or they connect arteries and veins. Now, let's discuss about that important fluid. Okay. And the fluid which is whose transportation is important. Okay. All this stuff, okay, all this pumping of the heart, the blood vessels, they carry the blood. And blood, if you look at the composition of the blood is a mixture. Okay. We have a fluid and some formed elements. The fluid part is known as plasma, and it comprises the 55% of the blood. 55% of the blood is the plasma, and it is a fluid matrix that consists of water and soluble proteins. Then we have the formed elements, which constitute 45% of the blood's composition. And these formed elements are of three types, that is, they consist of erythrocytes, which are known as the red blood cells. They carry the oxygen. The red blood cells, they carry the oxygen because they contain the pigment hemoglobin, the iron containing pigment hemoglobin. The oxygen attaches to this hemoglobin to form the oxyhemoglobin, and by this method the most of the oxygen is transported. The red blood cells, they don't have nucleus and has a lifespan of 120 days, that is 4 months, approximately 4 months. The second constituent of the formed elements is the leukocytes, or also known as the white blood cells. Now, these are important for defense and immunity of the body. These cells, these are nucleated and they are further categorized into granulocytes and agranulocytes. And then finally, we have the thrombocytes, which are commonly called as platelets. And they are mainly involved in clotting and repair of the blood vessels in order to prevent the blood loss. So, the main function of platelet in the time of any injury is to prevent the excess loss of blood. Now, talking about the total volume, so approximately on an average, an adult human has 5 liters of blood. And if you talk about the pH of the blood, so blood is slightly alkaline, having a pH of 7.35 to 7.45, 7 pH being the neutral. Okay. So if something is above the 7 pH, we say that it is alkaline. If it is below the 7 pH, we call it the acidic. So we say blood is slightly alkaline. And in the buffer, we have the bicarbonate ions and the hemoglobin. Now, when we were looking at the circulation of the blood in the body, so we say that in humans, we have double circulation. Okay? Double circulation means one is the systemic circulation and other is the pulmonary circulation. So this is the basic schematic. So from vena cava, the deoxygenated blood actually comes in the right atrium. It then enters the left the right ventricle. From left ventricle, when it contracts via the pulmonary artery, it goes towards the lungs. It goes towards the lungs. In lungs, the effective exchange of gases takes place, and the blood is then collected. It now becomes oxygenated. So from there, the pulmonary vein from the lungs bring it to the left atrium. Through left atrium, it enters the left ventricle, and through the aorta, it is then pumped towards the body. Okay. So this one is the pulmonary circulation that is complete. Now in the body, with the help of arteries, the blood arteries they become, or they expand, or they bifurcate to become the capillaries. The capillaries they enter the tissue. Okay. In tissue, the exchange of substances takes place. The oxygen gets consumed. The carbon dioxide then enters the blood. So this oxygenated blood now becomes deoxygenated, and it is carried by the veins from body through vena cava into the heart. So this is the double loop. Okay, so these are two different loops. Okay, and one more point to pay attention here is that normally all the arteries, okay, normally the arteries they carry the oxygenated blood from heart to different parts of the body. Okay. So when we say the arteries, they carry the oxygenated blood, and the veins, they carry the deoxygenated blood. But there is certain exception. Exception being the pulmonary arteries and veins. The pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood from heart to lungs, and the pulmonary vein brings the oxygenated blood. So the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary veins is the exception when it comes to carrying the oxygenated as well as deoxygenated blood. Generally, the arteries they carry the oxygenated blood, exception being the pulmonary artery, and veins they carry the deoxygenated blood, exception being the pulmonary vein. Now, let's discuss the heartbeat. Okay, so we say that the rate of human heart is 72 beats per minute. That is, the human heart beats 72 times in 1 minute. Okay, and with each stroke volume, okay, with each beat, 70 ml of blood is pumped. Okay, with each beat, 70 ml of blood is pumped. That means we have 72 beats per minute and 70 ml of blood is pumped per minute. That means approximately 5 liter and 40 ml of blood is pumped every minute. So we say the cardiac output, okay, the cardiac output of the blood of the heart is 5 liters per minute. 5 liters per minute. Okay. It all starts from 0 seconds. First, we have the atrial systole. Now, systole means contraction. Okay. Systole means contraction. So, first, the okay, atria, it contracts, and then the blood enters the ventricle, and it makes the lub sound. So the lub dub lub dub lub dub, that sound is the sound of the heartbeat. So this lub sound is made when the atrium it contracts and blood enters the ventricles. Then the ventricle contracts. That is the ventricular systole. Contraction means systole means contraction, and diastole means relaxation. Okay, so when the ventricle contracts, we get the dub sound. So the lub and dub sound is because of the contraction of the atrium and the ventricle. No sound is made when the atrium and ventricle they are getting relaxed. So after the ventricular systole, we experience a joint diastole, that is joint diastole, that is both the atrium as well as the ventricle they relax. Okay, they relax, and that is the diastole. So they contract separately, but they relax jointly. And all this cycle, it approximately takes zero 0.8 seconds. Okay, that is why in 1 minute we can have 72 of these cycles. That is the heartbeat. Now, till now we have discussed about the circulatory system, main circulatory system. Along with that, the circulation in the body is incomplete without another type of system that is called the lymphatic system. So we have something called lymph, which is the tissue fluid. Okay, so just like the blood is a fluid, we also have the lymph, which is the tissue fluid, and this is a colorless fluid. The lymph is colorless. The blood is red in color because of the red blood cells, because of the hemoglobin. So this is similar to plasma. Okay, this tissue fluid is similar to plasma of the blood, but it lacks the red blood cells and the large proteins. And it flows passively into the lymph vessels. Okay, so we have a dedicated network of vessels called the lymph vessels in which the lymph or the tissue fluid it flows passively. Okay, and when I say passively, that means for the circulation of the lymph, we do not require a pump. Okay, so for blood we have the pump, that is the heart. For tissue fluid, for the lymph, we do not require a, and it is driven solely by the muscle movement of the skeletal muscles. Okay, by the movement of the skeletal muscles. Now, the function of the lymphatic system or the lymph. So the important function is the drainage. So it returns the interstitial fluid to the major veins. Now, all these veins which are carrying this tissue fluid, they ultimately empty into the major veins of the body. Okay, so they enter into the major veins and it carries the absorbed fats from the intestine. It carries the absorbed fat from the intestine, and we have something called defense node, the lymph nodes. Okay, so we have something called lymph nodes in the lymphatic system. Okay, so these are like small nodes, joints. Okay, so there are many lymph nodes, and these lymph nodes they filter pathogens and produce the lymphocytes. Okay, they produce the lymphocytes, which are the T cells, okay, or the B cells of the body, the immune cells of the body, and these are the vital cells that provide immunity to the body. That means they fight off against the harmful pathogens. And finally, let's talk about the disorders. Okay, so the biggest disorder, as far as circulatory system is concerned, is the blood pressure. Okay. So the normal blood pressure during the systole and diastole is 120 to 80. Okay. So 120 mm of Hg, that is the unit of pressure, okay, the mm of mercury. 120 is the systolic reading and 80 is the diastolic reading. Now, on an average, if we see deviation from this 108, 120 and 80, if the blood pressure is low, okay, and what is blood pressure? Blood pressure is actually that pressure. So blood moves in arteries. So that moving blood in the arteries that exert certain pressure on the walls of artery. Okay. So moving blood in the artery, okay, in the walls of the vessels, it exerts certain pressure on the walls of the vessels. Okay, and that pressure is known as blood pressure. Okay. And the reading should be 120 and 80. But in case of low blood pressure, okay, when the reading drops below 120 and 80, and in case of high blood pressure, the reading increases to 140, 90 or beyond. Okay, so if this reading is greater than 140 of the systolic reading and the diastolic reading is greater than 90, we say that the person is suffering from or is experiencing high blood pressure. And the high blood pressure is a silent, it provides or it gives silent damage to brain and kidneys. These are vital internal organs. Then we have the atherosclerosis. Okay. So this is the lumen of an artery. Okay. So the uh, lumen narrowing by the calcium or fat deposit. So the lumen of the blood vessel. Okay. So lumen of the blood vessel, it becomes narrow. It becomes narrow because of the deposition or because of the blockage. Because calcium as well as certain fat or cholesterol is deposited there. And when the lumen is narrowed, that means the effective supply of oxygen will not take place. Okay? And this also reduces supply to the heart muscles. So the heart muscles or the cardiac muscles, they also require the supply of oxygenated blood. They also require the supply of the oxygenated blood like the other tissues. And because of this blockage, the effective transportation or the effective circulation of oxygenated blood, the oxygenated blood does not reach to the heart muscles, and that leads to the destruction, okay, or of the or that harms the walls or the muscles of the heart. That is known as atherosclerosis. Then we have acute chest pain, which is the warning sign of insufficient oxygen to the heart muscles. So, because of the atherosclerosis, not enough oxygen is reaching to the heart muscles, and because of that, the heart muscles, they tend to die. Okay, the cells or the tissues of the heart muscles, they tend to die, and because of that, we have acute chest pain. Okay, and this is the warning sign that insufficient amount of oxygen is reaching to the blood muscles or the heart muscles. And finally, we have the pump insufficiency. That is, the heart is not pumping enough blood to meet the needs of the body. Okay? And this is distinct from the cardiac arrest. So in cardiac arrest, the heart stops pumping altogether. Okay? In cardiac arrest, the heart stops pumping altogether. In heart failure, okay, in heart failure, the heart is pumping blood, but that pumping efficiency is not fulfilling the demands of the body. So the pumping of the blood, so blood is not, the heart is not pumping enough to meet the demands of body, and that condition is known as heart failure. Okay, so there is a difference between heart failure and cardiac arrest. In cardiac arrest, the heart stops completely. In heart failure, the heart becomes inefficient or insufficient. Okay, and this acute chest pain, it is the sign of heart attack. Okay. So these three terms, that is heart attack, heart failure, and cardiac arrest, are used quite interchangeably, but these are different. Now, finally, for the aspirants who are preparing for this year's APPSC Group 2 examination, we at Shikra Academy are bringing our foundation batch. The batch starts on 9th of Feb, and in this batch, you will be provided with live and recorded classes, 100% complete coverage of the GS syllabus, comprehensive discussion and classes on current affairs, subject-wise and full and test series, study materials and resources, and personalized mentorship by experienced faculty. And on public demand, we are extending our Republic Day offer. Now you can get this entire batch, or you can join the entire batch at an introductory price of rupees 9,999.